My $80,000 wedding was supposed to be the one day in my life where nothing could go wrong, where every detail I had planned with almost obsessive care would finally come together. The venue was a restored vineyard overlooking rolling hills, the kind of place people whispered about like it belonged in a magazine. White roses climbed the archway, string lights glowed softly as dusk approached, and 300 guests, family, colleagues, old friends, filled the rows of chairs with quiet excitement. I stood in the bridal suite, adjusting my veil, my hands trembling not with fear, but with relief. After years of being overlooked, corrected, and quietly belittled by my family, especially my older sister Marissa, this was the one moment that was entirely mine. Marissa had arrived early, of course. She always did when there was an audience. As my maid of honor, she had insisted on giving a toast later in the evening, something she framed as doing her duty as the big sister. The irony wasn't lost on me. Growing up, Marissa's version of duty had always involved reminding me of my place, second, smaller, less impressive. If I got an A, she got an award. If I got praise, she got attention. If I stayed quiet, she took the stage. Still, I told myself, people grow up. We were both adults now. I was a senior architect with my own firm. She was, well, still figuring things out, though she wore entitlement like a tailored suit. When she hugged me before the ceremony, her smile was wide and cold, her whisper sharper than the pins in my hair. "Big day for you," she said. "Don't mess it up." I laughed it off. I always had. The ceremony itself was perfect. When I walked down the aisle toward Daniel, steady, kind, endlessly patient, I felt something in my chest finally loosen. This was my future. Not my family's expectations, not Marissa's shadow, just us. The vows were spoken, applause broke out, and for a brief, shining moment, I believed the worst was behind me. The reception began with champagne. Trays moved through the crowd, glasses catching the light. I took one from Marissa herself. She was hovering near the bar, directing staff as if she owned the place. "Drink," she said, pressing the flute into my hand. "You're married now. Relax." I remember thinking it tasted slightly bitter. I also remember telling myself I was imagining things. Within minutes, the room began to tilt. At first, it felt like nerves, like adrenaline crashing after the ceremony. Then, my heart started racing, too fast, too hard, while my limbs grew heavy, unresponsive. I leaned toward Daniel, whispering that something wasn't right. His smile vanished instantly. By the time I collapsed, the music hadn't even stopped. Guests gasped. Someone laughed nervously, assuming it was a joke or a fainting spell. I heard Marissa's voice above the noise. "Oh my God, she's always been dramatic. She probably skipped lunch." The last thing I saw before everything went dark was her raising her glass. I woke up under harsh white lights, my wedding dress cut open, IV lines running into my arms. A doctor was speaking quickly, firmly, using words like toxicology and intentional ingestion. Daniel's face hovered near mine, pale with fear and fury. "She was dosed," the doctor said. "If she'd waited longer, you'd be planning a funeral instead of a honeymoon." The hospital contacted the police. Protocol, they said. Standard procedure when substances were found that shouldn't be there. My phone buzzed endlessly on the bedside table, messages stacking up, confusion, concern, rumors already spreading through the guests who'd witnessed my collapse. Marissa didn't come. Instead, she sent a text. "Relax, it was just something to take the edge off. You're so sensitive." That message changed everything. While doctors stabilized me, Daniel did something brilliant. He preserved everything. The remaining champagne flute, the bottle it came from, the security footage from the venue, timestamps, witness statements. He called my lawyer before he called my mother. By morning, the narrative had shifted. This wasn't a bridal faint. It wasn't stress. It was a crime. And suddenly, my sister, the woman who had spent her life humiliating me in private, was about to be exposed in public. But I didn't rush. I lay in that hospital bed, listening, watching, letting Marissa think she'd gotten away with it. because if she wanted attention so badly, I was going to give it to her. At the reception hall, untouched plates were cleared away. My wedding toast never happened, but the stage was still there. The microphones were still wired, and 300 people were still talking. Marissa had always loved an audience. I decided she would get one exactly when she least expected it.
When I said no to babysitting my sister's kids, I thought that would be the end of it. Clear, simple, respectful boundaries. The kind adults are supposed to understand. But with my sister, Tara, boundaries were like yellow traffic lights. Not a warning, just a challenge to speed through. I still remember her reaction when I refused. The offended gasp, the dramatic pause, the accusation that I was selfish, even though she had asked me last minute on a Monday evening, knowing fully well that I worked night shifts and had finally earned a rare day off, a day I had been planning for weeks to catch up on sleep and finally clean the apartment that had slowly turned into a laundry battlefield. And as usual, Tara turned the conversation into a guilt trip Olympics, going on about how exhausted she was, how unhelpful her husband had been, how no one ever supports her, ignoring the reality that she had dumped her kids on everyone in the family for years. But this time, I stayed firm. Not angry, just honest. I can't. I need to rest, I said. And she hung up with a passive-aggressive, fine, whatever. But I didn't think she'd actually do something insane. I genuinely believed she would find another sitter or cancel her plans like a normal parent. Because despite everything, I still assumed my sister had some sliver of responsibility left in her, that she wouldn't put her own children at risk just to prove a point or punish me. I was wrong. Very, very wrong. The doorbell rang around 6:45 p.m., long after I'd already taken melatonin, dimmed all the lights, and wrapped myself in a blanket burrito on the couch, ready to disappear into a peaceful, uninterrupted sleep. At first, I ignored it, thinking it was a package, until I heard the faint, confused voices of children outside, voices I recognized. I dragged myself to the door, heart thudding, annoyance rising, only to open it and see two wide-eyed kids, my niece Lily and nephew Jonah, standing there with backpacks, jackets half-zipped, and an Uber driver behind them wearing a deeply uncomfortable expression. Before I could even form a question, the driver held up his phone and said, "Hi, are you Ava? Their mom booked a ride to drop them off here." And I swear, my blood went from warm to boiling in seconds. "She what?" I asked him, staring at him as if the words might rearrange into something less horrific. But no, my sister had actually put her kids in a stranger's car and sent them across the city without asking me, without warning me, without even making sure I was awake or home. The driver explained awkwardly that Tara told him I was expecting them, that everything was arranged, and he looked nervous, like he knew something about this entire situation was wrong, but didn't want trouble. I assured him I would take responsibility for the kids because what else could I do? Send them back alone again? The man looked relieved, the kids looked confused, and I looked like I was 2 seconds away from combusting. Once I got them inside, the first thing I did was check if they were okay. Physically, emotionally, everything. They were fine, just confused and a little scared. Jonah, who was only 5, kept asking, "Auntie, why didn't you come pick us up?" And Lily whispered, "Mom said you were happy to watch us because you had nothing else to do." And that sentence stung like acid because it was such a classic Tara lie, framing me as the free, idle, childless sister whose time meant nothing. I fed them dinner, turned on cartoons to settle them, and texted Tara with the fury of 1,000 suppressed childhood resentments. I didn't yell, didn't insult, didn't curse, but every word I typed was sharpened with controlled rage. "You put your kids in an Uber to my house after I told you no. What is wrong with you?" She didn't respond immediately, which scared me because Tara's usually glued to her phone. But after 20 minutes, she finally replied with, "Relax. They're with you. They're safe. I needed a night out. You're making this dramatic." Dramatic. a word she has used my entire life to minimize my feelings, my boundaries, my time, my existence. I called her. She declined my call. I called again. Declined. I texted, "If something happened to them in that car, you'd be in jail." She responded with a voice note saying, "Oh, please, nothing happened. Stop acting."
How I'd always been dramatic, how weddings were emotional, how sometimes a little too much celebration got the better of people. Laughter flickered, uncertain but polite. She was building toward a punchline that would paint me as fragile and herself as the long-suffering sibling. I let her get there. I let her savor the attention. Then I stood. The room quieted in a way that felt like a held breath. I didn't take the microphone from her. I gestured to the MC, who handed me a second one. "Thank you for being here," I said, my voice clear, trained by years of presenting quarterly reports and defending budgets. "Last night didn't go the way we planned. Some of you know I spent it in the hospital. I'm okay now, and I'm grateful. Before we continue celebrating, there's something important I need to share." I nodded toward the AV booth. The screen behind us lit up, not with photos, but with a clean clinical slide bearing the hospital letterhead and the words "Toxicology Summary." Gasps rippled across the room. Elena's smile faltered. "I didn't faint. I didn't have a panic attack. My drink was dosed with a sedative. The lab confirmed it this morning." A murmur swelled. I raised a hand. "Please, I won't be long." I motioned again, and the next slide appeared. A timeline compiled from staff statements, camera stills, timestamps. Names redacted, except one, Elena's. Her glass hovered in midair, forgotten. "I won't speculate about intent," I said, even as my heart hammered. "I'll let the facts speak. The police have copies of all of this. The doctors are here tonight because they asked to be." Two people in plain clothes stood at the edge of the room. One nodded when our eyes met. Elena tried to laugh it off, tried to interject. "This is insane." But the sound died in her throat when the doctor stepped forward and explained, calmly and precisely, what the drug did, how it interacted with alcohol, what could have happened if I hadn't received prompt care. He didn't dramatize it. He didn't need to. The silence afterwards was complete. When Elena finally spoke, her voice cracked. "I didn't mean—" She stopped, swallowed. "It was a joke." That's the thing about jokes. They end when everyone laughs. This one didn't. The police approached then, not with handcuffs, but with practiced neutrality. "Miss Elena, we need to ask you some questions." She looked around the room, at faces that had turned from indulgent to wary, at friends who suddenly remembered other things she'd left off over the years. She looked at our parents, who stared back with the stunned horror of people realizing the story they'd told themselves was wrong. She looked at me last, and for the first time there was no hunger in her eyes, only fear. The aftermath was quieter than I expected. There were no viral clips, no dramatic arrests on the dance floor, just statements, interviews, a lawyer's card pressed into Elena's trembling hand. Mark and I cut the cake anyway. It tasted like vanilla and relief. People hugged me with a gentleness that didn't feel like pity. Some apologized for not seeing it before. I told them they didn't have to. The truth had a way of surfacing when it was ready. Weeks later, the legal process moved at its own pace. Elena was charged. The alleation negotiations were tense. I didn't gloat. I didn't post. I showed up when required and lived my life in between. The venue refunded part of the cost. The vendors sent notes. The bartender checked in. The doctor wrote once more to explain a technical detail, and I thanked him. My parents tried to fix things with a flood of calls and meals and promises. I set boundaries that felt like walls at first, and later like doors, closed when I needed them to be, open on my terms. On a quiet Sunday, Mark and I finally took our honeymoon, not to the place we'd planned, but somewhere smaller, calmer. On the beach at dusk, Mark asked me if I was angry. I considered the question, watching the tide erase our footprints. I said, I was. Then I realized anger was her oxygen. I didn't want to keep her breathing. He laughed, a sound that felt like home. Sometimes people ask if it was hard to let her speak before I revealed the truth. I tell them it was necessary. Elena had always relied on the assumption that she controlled the narrative. Letting her toast first wasn't cruelty, it was symmetry. She chose the stage, I chose the ending. And in the end, the most satisfying part wasn't watching her face fall or hearing the room go silent. It was walking away married, alive, and certain that I'd finally learned the difference between family you inherit and family you protect.